webinar, where we will focus on two life conditions, poverty and adversity, currently impacting many youth in America. I am Devasia Noble, an Associate of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at America's Promise Alliance. During today's webinar, we will focus on the combination of data and science that signal to us that systems must respond to factors outside of the classroom that are impacting academic performance. If we are to meet the needs of all students, then we must better understand student needs and the underlying causes for those needs. For this webinar, we will focus on poverty and adversity and approaches for intervening on their impact. We are pleased to have worked with Turnaround for Children and City Connects, two organizations working diligently and deliberately to meet students' needs beyond the academics. We will open the line for questions and answers at the end of their presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Monica Kinchelow, and I am the Senior Director here on the Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships team. America's Promise Alliance has led the GradNation campaign for nearly 10 years, and in that time, we have seen the graduation rate climb from the 70s to a 2016 rate of 84%. Our action platform aims to get at the practices that contribute to an increasing graduation rate by reflecting the experiences and expertise of nonprofit, school district, and classroom leaders who are working every day to improve graduation and life outcomes for young people. The non-academic factors platform area reflects the fact that life in America has become more complicated for more youth. While we would like to see young people be able to focus only on their academic, social, and skills development, the reality is that many are facing food insecurity, experiencing anxiety and violence, in addition to facing health issues and family economic instability. Young people with challenging life experiences are more likely to become disengaged at school and leave high school. Acing a math test is just less of a priority. Over the past dozen years or so, we have collectively gotten better at tracking and standardizing the data, and as a result, we've seen remarkable gains. The National Center for Education Statistics, NCES, recently released graduation rate data for 2016. The nation now stands at a graduation rate of 84.1%. And although we are excited to see the tick upwards, we know that to reach 90%, we need to increase graduation rate equity, and that means we must focus on students of color and low-income students. The data show us, for example, that about a third of Black and Hispanic youth in America are living in poverty and have lower graduation rates than their white and Asian peers. Now, most of us already know this, and it is heartening to know that the gap is slowly closing over time. But we must also act with urgency because with each year that passes, there is a group of young people who did not graduate. As these demographic data show, at the same time that graduation rates are increasing and gaps are slowly closing, we have seen an increase in child poverty across race and ethnic groups. As of 2015, 1 in 5 children in America are living in poverty. And over the last 15 years, an increasing proportion of our children are Hispanic. Most public school students are students of color, and public schools are serving an increasing number of English language learners. We include these data to emphasize that the impact of poverty and increasing diversity in America's schools is real, and we should not assume that schools alone are equipped or built to address it. In this webinar, we seek to connect the dots between the needs to increase graduation rate equity, the reality of poverty among youth in America, and approaches that are working today in our communities.
We must resist the temptation to say that addressing the needs of students in poverty is too difficult or that life is simply more challenging for some than others. If we take the time to understand what is happening inside of young people, we can better access solutions and partnerships to meet students where they are. Child and youth development science provides two critical insights. First, that brain development is critical from birth to age 5, and second, that the brain's frontal lobe continues to develop through age 18 and even through age 25. While many interventions are focused on children in younger years and in elementary school, the GradNation campaign seeks to elevate systematic approaches that continue with youth through the middle and high school years. It is not enough to know that a young person is facing challenges with his or her mental health, safety, or housing, for example, or that the young person's brain is still developing while those challenges are happening. The system in which the young person lives must be prepared to respond to this knowledge. The figure above shows a visual representation of the different players that maximize the positive impact on each young person. Youth exist in an ecological system composed of families, neighborhoods, and schools, all of which operate under economic, policy, and cultural contexts. As such, any attempt to influence or change the impact of adversity must tackle the solution at all levels of the young person's ecology, from parents and families to policy and the economy. Due to the complexity of poverty and adversity, no one entity can address the needs of students who face these challenges. The models discussed today are compelling because they do just this. They respond to the needs of young people at multiple levels of the ecological system in which they live.
To meet the needs of adolescents living in poverty or facing adversity, we often hear about wraparound services, comprehensive services, full-service schools, community schools, promised neighborhoods, and collective impact strategies. These approaches often have two things in common. They rely on partnerships across multiple organizations, and they are tiered such that different services go to different children. For today's webinar, America's Promise Alliance is thrilled to be joined by experts in two different approaches to responding to poverty and adversity. Giselle Shorter is Vice President for Policy and Partner Engagement at Turnaround for Children, and she's here to share the Turnaround for Children's Building Blocks for Learning model. The building blocks serve as a framework to educate the whole child based on developmental needs. We are also joined by Mary Walsh, Executive Director at City Connects, and Patrice DiNatal, who is Director of New Practice at City Connects. And Mary and Patrice will provide an overview of the principles of effective practice for integrated student support, which is a model they use to provide schools and communities with the resources they need to address the needs of students by taking a whole child approach. I want to welcome our speakers, and to get us started, I will turn things over to Dr. Shorter at Turnaround for Children.
Thank you for having me. Recent research from leading scientists in a number of fields is telling a new and converging story. I think we're having a little bit of tech. Sorry about that. Recent research from leading scientists in a number of fields is telling a new converging story about the scientific underpinnings of how children develop, how they become learners, how their environments can nourish or hinder their progress. This knowledge from the science of learning and development opens the door for new creative approaches to education that have the potential to address some of the most intractable challenges facing our children, teachers, and school leaders. Turnaround translates the science into actionable strategies and tools for educators. Turnaround was founded in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks to serve New York City public school children. To date, we have partnered with over 100 schools across New York City, Newark, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C., and have developed a practical expertise in whole school transformation. This year, we will reach 5,000 students and work directly with approximately 1,000 educators. Our K-12 system was created to be a great equalizer, leveling the playing field for children born into poverty. But it hasn't done that. And today, according to the U.S. Census, 9.6 million school children are living in poverty. and approximately 51% of American school students are growing up in low-income households. This is particularly significant because there is a dynamic link between childhood poverty, adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as ACEs, such as emotional or physical neglect, and educational attainment. We know that children who have 4 or more ACEs have significantly greater risk to their lifelong health and educational outcomes. They are 32 times more likely to be identified as having learning and behavioral problems. So what we're learning is that adversity doesn't just happen to children, it happens inside them through the biological process of stress. Prolonged exposure to stress exerts profound effects on development, behavior, learning, and overall health. Stress is a powerful example of the role of context in development, of how environment and experiences can get under the skin and impact our very biology. Neurobiology helps explain why. Under chronic, unbuffered stress, the kind that comes with being exposed to violence and to substance abuse, losing a loved one, or being homeless or food insecure, children experience a surge of the hormone cortisol, which over time impairs the limbic system, the centers of the brain that are key for regulating emotions, working memory, and executive functions. These structures, the prefrontal cortex, which controls the attention and organization, the hippocampus, which controls memory and many learning functions, and the amygdala, where memories of stress and trauma are stored, are cross-wired and particularly sensitive to the effects of stress. Unfortunately, teachers are often not equipped with this knowledge. They see children in their classroom who can't focus or engage in their lesson at hand. They see children acting out or severely withdrawn, but they don't often understand what's behind this behavior and the why. Turnaround works with schools to impart this knowledge to educators. Many high-poverty schools are in chaos with large numbers of students who are not ready for learning and school staff who believe their training didn't adequately prepare them for the set of challenges they encounter daily. Through Turnaround's 15-year history, we've been in a lot of schools and we've noticed a pattern. Children with ongoing, unbuffered stress caught in a fight, flight, or freeze dynamic that causes them to be more impulsive, inattentive, distrustful, and more easily triggered. This dynamic makes it difficult for children to engage in learning, and we see them fall further and further behind in school. This is at the core of the widening achievement gap for many young people growing up in states of poverty. Students impacted by adversity don't just leave the stress at the schoolhouse door, they bring it with them. That's not to say that young people growing up in states of poverty don't bring a wealth of assets, for example, grit or tenacity. But one child under the influence of stress can derail an entire classroom. Now imagine a whole school filled with such classrooms. It can produce a negative culture, shutting down learning for everyone. But I mentioned this is a pattern, a reoccurring and predictable pattern, and a pattern is something you can solve for. So the good news is that the brain is a malleable structure. We now know that the expression of our genetic makeup and the realization of our potential are not fixed at birth. A significant portion of brain development happens after we are born in direct response to the experiences, relationships, and environments we encounter from the prenatal period all the way into adulthood. The amazing ability of our neural connections to strengthen and grow as we interact with the world around us underscores the chance for all children to reach their full potential. This is both a powerful opportunity and a choice, meaning we can design school environments and build relationships to help children manage stress and establish the skills to become successful lifelong learners. So what the science is telling us is just as the brain is wired to learn, our classrooms and schools can be built to accelerate learning and healthy development. The integration of environments, relationships, Skills and mindsets should be foundational to school and classroom design for all children. Since our founding, Turnaround has been developing an integrated approach to designing learning environments that are physically and emotionally safe, trauma-informed, filled with strong, trusting relationships, and that intentionally build adult and student skills and mindsets. When this integrated approach is combined with rigorous academics and engaging pedagogy, there is an acceleration of both healthy student development and academic achievement. Turnaround partners in several ways. Our intensive school model, otherwise known as school innovation partnerships, are designed to help individual schools diagnose challenges and integrate environment, adult skills, as well as student skills and mindsets, as well as academics, otherwise known as ESM&A. We support all school staff through weekly trainings and ongoing observation, job-embedded capacity building, and real-time coaching. In addition to the embedded school model, Turnaround trains cohorts of school leaders, student support personnel, and teacher leaders from multiple schools through monthly professional development sessions to diagnose challenges, integrate and improve student supports, focus on social, emotional, and academic development, and support the adults in the building to implement integrated ESM&A strategies and practices. Finally, we partner at the district and state level to help system leaders audit and improve policies and initiatives focused on healthy student development and to mitigate the dynamic impact of adversity on development and learning. Turnaround's intensive embedded model historically focused on resetting the school environment. We continue to prioritize school climate, but have expanded to include environmental conditions that support success along the developmental and learning continuum. These include educator-focused strategies and practices for establishing trusting relationships, attachment and emotional connections, physical and emotional safety, and promote a sense of belonging and purpose in students. Leadership practices that are designed to strengthen relational trust amongst educators and between school staff and families to provide deeper knowledge about the children and ensure greater alignment between home and school. Student support services focus on the mechanisms for attunement to student needs. Let's look at how we operationalize this model. Turnaround uses an evidence-based, multi-tiered system of supports, otherwise known as an MTSS framework, to identify and organize strategies that include supports for students at varying levels of need. We selected this framework because it's designed to ensure that all students have access to the supports they need to be successful as learners. Tactically, we support school innovation partners to develop structures that reach beyond the classroom to provide nuanced and attuned systems of academic and social support. Tier 3 is aimed at students considered the highest risk. The key here is individualized plans with coordinated access to integrated services, including health, mental health, and social service wraparound supports that enable children's healthy development via on-site supports as well as community-embedded resources. Tier 2 offers specialized group services and systems for at-risk students who benefit from targeted networked supports. Tier 1 is for all students and consists of school-wide and classroom-wide proactive and reactive systems and plans with a focus on the classroom community and relationship building. Relationships with children need to be intentional and developmentally appropriate. They need to be characterized by 3 things. They need to be attuned, culturally responsive, and trusting in order to be positive developmental forces in children's lives. When that happens, trusting relationships release another hormone, the hormone oxytocin. This hormone can oppose and block the effects of cortisol. In other words, this is the way to prevent the negative effects of stress. Using this underlying understanding of the brain and the benefits of relationship-rich environments, turnaround sought to identify the skills and mindsets common among all successful students. Now, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about your most successful students or young people in your life. What are the skills they have in common? At Turnaround, we asked that very question and looked at how people acquire the skills and mindsets, and even more importantly, in what order they acquire them. And what we came up with was the building blocks for learning. It's a framework for comprehensive student development, grounded in science, in service of equity. What you see in the building blocks for learning are the social, emotional, and cognitive skills that are well supported in the scientific literature that are measurable and malleable, meaning we can build them, and they have a direct connection to learning and academic growth. The guiding principles for inclusion were alignment to the development of a child as a learner in an educational setting. A measurable and malleable skill, behavior, or mindset, not a personality or character trait such as brown eyes or being left-handed. Each element is strongly supported by a research basis that correlates with or even predicts academic achievement. As I mentioned earlier, the skills identified on the bottom 3 rows are particularly vulnerable to the effects of adversity. They include self-regulation, executive functioning, and relationship skills. Yes, the skills that children need most for successful learning are particularly vulnerable to the effects of adversity and a powerful reason for the persistence of the achievement gap. But remember the good news. The brain is malleable. These skills can be intentionally developed in children and explicitly taught in schools. The bottom 3 rows and self-regulation as the cornerstone are prerequisites for the higher order skills you see on the top 2 rows, like resilience and academic tenacity. What is especially unique about the framework is that it integrates skills in a developmental sequence that more closely reflects the pathways by which children acquire these skills in life. And most importantly, it acknowledges that children don't always get the same start in life, and they don't follow the same path through that life. Again, human development is a progression over time, a continuum. We all know that development of English and math skills is a progression. We start with foundational skills like addition and subtraction and move to greater and more complex forms like calculus. The human brain is like that as well. It develops beginning in the womb and continues to develop all the way into young adulthood. Given that, there are opportunities to promote healthy development or new skills and mindsets along the way. Now imagine schools designed to power whole child development. Such schools have the conditions where each child can thrive, not only enabling them to overcome the effects of adversity, but in addition, unleashing the expression of the potential in each and every child. This visual represents our through line to impact and the series of inputs and outputs we strive for in partnership with schools and districts, and is in service to the outcomes we all seek for young people. Now note how we track progress along this continuum of inputs to outputs to outcomes. We partner with schools to build systems, structures, policies, and procedures that reinforce skills and mindsets, those very skills and mindsets discussed in the building blocks and rooted in the lasting science of learning and development. While you read the slide that's presented, I'm going to do a little bit of a recap so that we can really distill the knowledge here. So science tells us the brain is malleable, well into early adulthood, and incredibly responsive to the environment and relationships we expose children to. Therefore, schools have the opportunity to create healthy environments, suffused with positive relationships. We can ensure that all students are on a healthy developmental pathway towards success in school and beyond if we acknowledge toxic stress can impact the developing brain and therefore students' experiences at school. Positive relationships are the antidote to stress and are the foundation and fuel for healthy student development. Because our brains are malleable, there are critical skills and mindsets that students can build over time, over the course of development, for school and beyond. A school environment that promotes physical and emotional safety and a sense of belonging through relationships creates the conditions for these skills and mindsets to take root. Schools do everything for students, but through the adults. Therefore, the adults are the critical lever for driving student outcomes. We're at an inflection point. The science and integration of science into concrete tools, strategies, and practices provides resources and a pathway to ensure that young people growing up in poverty and those experiencing adversity don't have to beat the odds. We can change the odds. Thank you, and I'm going to pass on to Mary at City Connect to do a little bit of a deeper dive on the MTSS and some of what they're doing in their model.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It is our pleasure to talk with you this afternoon about an approach to student support in schools that has very solid evidence to support that it works, is liked by principals, teachers, and community partners, is cost-effective, and leads to best practices in student support. City Connects is a school-based practice carried out by school counselors and school social workers that integrates services and enrichment opportunities for each and every student in the school. It makes sure that every student gets the right service at the right time, over time, and it works. City Connects is grounded in what research has told us about how human beings, in our case students, develop. Each student, as you all know, has a unique developmental pathway, so the pattern of needs and strengths that they bring to learning varies from one student to another, and this pattern changes over time. Although strengths and needs or risks try to stay in balance in all of us, poverty, among other factors, can cause risks to outweigh strengths. Developmental science tells us that multiple domains of the students are all developing at the same time: academic, social emotional, health, relationships with families, and many more domains of development. Finally, and most critically from our perspective, developmental science has led us to understand that the course of a student's development is not fixed. It can be altered, and the right set of contexts and interventions can change a child's developmental trajectory. We're having a little technical difficulty with changing the slides.
It was working before.
Mm-hmm. City Connects is located currently in 12 school districts across 5 states, in public, charter, and private schools. It has 1 model and 4 adaptations to different developmental levels. And today we will focus on the secondary, but we're in elementary, pre-K, and we're doing a pilot in community college. The City Connects approach was co-designed over a 2-year planning process within a research practice partnership in which Boston College collaborated intensively with public school leaders and staff, with families, and with community agencies. It combined the best of available research and theory with the critical on-the-ground experience of practitioners and families. In this planning process, what we learned was what teachers always knew, that many of their students, especially those living in poverty, faced substantial out-of-school challenges, and further, that schools alone could not meet these challenges. Families and community agency partners were essential to addressing the out-of-school needs of students. And teachers told us they could not also be social workers, nurses, or after-school providers. However, bringing all these providers to the school created its own set of issues, especially when there was no one in the school to organize them, and most critically, to identify exactly which services and enrichment opportunities each child needed. City Connects developed a strategy to organize the partners. Some provided prevention, some provided early intervention, and some provided intensive intervention. Furthermore, some were located in the community, the majority, but some were provided by the schools. But take a look at the center of the diagram. Here we tell the story of City Connects, which is not just organizing services, because that's not sufficient to address the challenges of students, but trying to figure out a strategy that will get the right services to the right child at the right time. And that requires a full-time person in the school, either a school counselor, social worker, adjustment counselor, to implement a systematic and a systemic practice that will lead to the right supports, to the right students at the right time, over time.
So in order to get the right supports to the right student at the right time, the City Connects practice, which as Mary said, is implemented by a master's trained and licensed school counselor or social worker, who we call the school site coordinator, is depicted in this diagram. Early in the school year, the coordinator gathers individual student-level information by classroom in 4 developmental domains: academic, social, emotional, behavioral, physical health, and family, and schedules a whole class review meeting with each classroom teacher. These whole class review meetings take place between October and December. At this whole class review meeting, each student's strengths and needs are discussed and probed for clarity and for root cause across the 4 developmental domains mentioned earlier. Following each in-depth discussion, the team then recommends a personalized and holistic student support plan for each student that addresses both of these strengths and needs for each of the developmental domains. Within the plan, a tiered set of services are recommended, utilizing both school-based and community-based resources. For students who are in need of intensive services, an individual student review meeting is scheduled, consisting of a team of professionals who will discuss the student in depth, resulting in the creation of an individual student support plan with specific goals and intensive services. But in both cases, the coordinator then reaches out to families to discuss the plan and propose services. Once agreed upon with families, the coordinator reaches out to both the school and to the community-based agencies to make appropriate and tailored referrals for services. The coordinator creates and stewards community agency partnerships throughout the school year to be able to tailor services for children in an efficient manner. These personalized student support plans are entered into the City Connect's proprietary database to create a record for each student and to document services referred and delivered. Each plan is communicated with appropriate school-based teachers and staff and is followed up every 8 weeks to discuss the impact on student development. At the elementary level, the whole class review is conducted by the coordinator, the classroom teacher, and a third party such as an after-school director or a school-based administrator. At the secondary level, the whole class review is termed the whole grade review, because at the secondary level, we add a 5th domain, college and career readiness. Additional information on each student is collected, such as course completion, GPA, credits earned, scores on PSAT or ACT, as well as attendance and any disciplinary actions. At this level, the voice of the student is gained via a student support survey created by City Connects, and the student is brought into the discussion regarding strengths, early alerts, and recommended services. The whole grade review then involves a review of those strengths and needs across the 5 developmental domains for a cohort of students by a wider team for probing and planning. This team may consist of the coordinator, 1 or more teachers, an administrator, and other school-based support staff. An example of the kinds of services that are provided via this student support program are prevention and enrichment services, and you can see the array of services from sports and art and drama, school-based internships or school-supported college and career information nights, early intervention services like mentoring, tutoring, social skills groups, college and financial aid assistance workshops, and intensive crisis intervention, which really is medical health, counseling, school-based supported college visits. Just an example. The City Connects database, called SSIS, creates a student record for each student, which includes student-level information, such as demographic information. It includes personalized plans based on the City Connect student support practices, and it contains resource information, such as services recommended and intensity level of services.
Anonymous yearly satisfaction surveys with many questions help us to understand how teachers, principals, and community partners perceive the intervention. The top line findings are shown here, with high levels of satisfaction across all 3 groups. And we might note that these levels of satisfaction persist year over year. So, does it work? Does an intervention like this for every child and a plan, does it work? Here we see the achievement gap on statewide tests, and this happens to be Massachusetts statewide tests. And the achievement gap is the difference between the top line, which is the state overall, with a 31% rate of poverty among the students, and the bottom line, which are the Boston Public Schools, with an 83% poverty level among the students. Take a look at what happens to the students in Boston who are in the City Connects intervention schools. City Connects will always be the blue line in these graphs. What you see here is that when students are nearing the end of their elementary grades, grades 1 to 5, they begin to separate from each other, the two groups, with City Connects and without. And as they move into middle, after they leave the intervention, we see significant differences in grades 6, 7, and 8, and these students are scattered across a variety of middle schools. City Connects obviously has a K-8 and a secondary model, but these students happen to be in schools which were K-5 schools. This is on the math statewide test. Here we see the statewide test for students in literacy, English language arts, and we see, again, the impact of the City Connects program intervention on English language learners. And that's a significant difference, obviously, in grades 7 and 8. Those are long-term outcomes which we did not predict from the intervention, but which we were delighted to see. Here we see City Connects lowering the probability of chronic absenteeism, that is, students who are absent 10 or more days in school. And here what you see is for chronic absenteeism, after students have left the intervention in these particular schools at grade 5 and go to a variety of middle schools without City Connects, the intervention has a lasting effect. And as you know, chronic absenteeism is one of the big predictors of dropout. We see the same kinds of results in terms of students being held back in grade. City Connects lowers the rate of their being held back in grade. And here you see, notice the two grades where being held back in grade nationally happens most frequently, grade 1 and grade 9. And you can see that City Connects in each of those cases is significantly lower, the rate of dropout. I'm sorry, the rate of being held back in grade. Here you see dropout rates. And this was a very powerful finding. We followed students who had had City Connects in grades 1 to 5. We followed them over the course of their school careers into grade 12, and we looked at the rate of dropout in high school among these students. We had not seen these students in the intervention since they were in grade 5. The dropout rate among these students was about half. And here we looked at the dropout rate for subgroups. In this particular slide, the subgroups happen to be the two of real interest in terms of the dropout rates, Black males and Latino males. And again, we see the same finding that for the City Connect students, the students who had it up to grade 5, the dropout rate is about half. Columbia University did a study of the return on investment for City Connects. And if we just look at the cost of the intervention itself, the return on investment is on the right-hand side, and that is 11 to 1. For every dollar invested, there's 11 yielded in return to the students. On the left-hand side, you see the return on investment if we factor in the cost of all the services that students get and all the enrichment opportunities. When we factor that in, the return on investment is still 3 to 1. And we happen to do this study in an area of the country where the cost of at least medical services is extraordinarily high, in Boston. And we see there's still a positive return on investment. All of this leads us to conclude that if you look at the theory and you consider the research, there are some principles of how to do effective practice in the field of student support. And there are 4 effective practices from our perspective. 1, that it must be customized or tailored to the individual student. No two students are alike, and when they go to the pediatrician, they don't get the same prescriptions when even on a well child check. And why would we give them all the same treatment in school? So we need to individualize it, but very importantly, it needs to happen for all students. In student support, we've really spent a lot of time and many years focusing on the kids in the most difficulty. And in the meantime, lots of kids have gone through the cracks. And those slippages through the cracks don't become obvious till they're older and when it's more costly and more difficult to alter the course of development. Secondly, we believe that student support must be comprehensive. It must focus on the whole child, not just one domain. And as all of these programs have learned, it must be multi-tiered systems of support. Thirdly, it must be coordinated. Within a school, the structure and process of the school must accommodate student support in an intentional way and an organized way. For many years in our schools, we know that students have received random acts of intervention, and that doesn't help. We need systemic approaches. Finally, it needs to be continuous and it be happening at every grade level, at pre-K, elementary, secondary, and it needs to be accountable. We can't be advertising programs that don't have evidence of effectiveness. Thank you.
You want to start with?
Thank you so much to our speakers from Turnaround for Children and City Connects. We really value and appreciate your experience and expertise. We do have a few questions, and at this time I want to encourage all our participants to enter any questions into the chat function, and we will elevate those and share those out. So for our first question, we have a question of whether there are also programs or workshops to teach case managers who work with out-of-school youth and deal with out-of-school youth on a regular basis. So I might invite any of our speakers to respond to this question about out-of-school youth.
So Turnaround partners in DC with the district as well as KIPP and has delivered a series of cluster trainings to school-based as well as beacon or out-of-school time social workers. And so that is a model that we've engaged with as part of the continuum of service.
At City Connects, one of the deliverables from City Connects is a broad range of professional development modules that we've created that mirror the practice for any professional and even case managers who'd like to access that through our City Connects learning management system.
Okay, thank you for those answers. The next question we have is what recommendations do you have for teachers and other leaders in the school that can provide them with skills they need to address the needs of their students? And this is a question for Turnaround for Children.
So one of the things that we do at the outset of a partnership is a full audit of what are the systems, the capacities, and the core teacher practices that we find across the school building, but also pushing into classes and understanding what's the dynamic between the actual teacher and the students that are in the classroom, right? And so from there, we support development of the multi-tiered system of support. We actually have a resource manual and tools for not only integrating the mental health partnership, but developing and designing an MTSS.
Great. We have a couple questions about the City Connects data that was shared, so I'm sort of just going to rattle them off a little bit. First, how many students are included in the data you shared today? So the N size, and also what was the attrition rate for City Connect students in the longitudinal findings?
The number of students, we started with 50,000 students in the database. It's a pretty large database. In these particular analyses, I believe there were 9,000 students in the intervention schools, and the rest were in the control schools. We have data from schools that were City Connects and non-City Connects, and I'll have to get the attrition rate and send that to you. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue.
Great. So keeping with City Connects, just to keep you on your toes, our audience was impressed with the data from elementary school. I wonder if you could share a little bit, and you did in your slides, about outcomes for students receiving services beyond 5th grade and what you might be seeing in your secondary school models.
The secondary school model, we're essentially seeing the same data with respect to dropout and academic improvement. We're seeing year-over-year improvement. We haven't published that data yet, but we're certainly seeing the same pattern that we saw at the elementary.
I think what's interesting from my perspective on the data is if you start with students young at the elementary level, you can see that attendance improves at secondary, that test scores improve at secondary, that retention and grade improve in secondary. So the trajectory from elementary to secondary holds.
Great, thank you. Another question for City Connects, whether or not, sorry, just finding our place again. Oh, what is the, if you could shed any light on the cost of City Connects and sort of what the on-ramp looks like for implementation and what it would take to bring that type of model to a community.
Great question. The on-ramp, we'll start there, consists of a pretty intensive study of what the challenges are for that particular school district and what the strengths and needs of the students are from the perspective of the principals, the teachers, and the community agency partners. So we do within within the school district an analysis really of what their challenges are with student support and what the current strategies they have for delivering student support and the adequacy of those strategies from the perspective of principals, teachers, and community partners. And as you might imagine, there's quite a few differences across those perspectives. We then work with the leadership in the school district and help them to understand what the model is. Obviously, if there's not buy-in there, it's not a good time to proceed. But usually when principals and school leadership hear about what the model does, what its outcomes are, and how it really simply enhances an existing school structure. We're not bringing a new structure. We're enhancing existing student support structures in schools and processes. Folks are pretty open. And we then work with getting the right school counselors and school social workers in place. We love to retrain existing school counselors and school social workers if possible. And then are ready to launch after we do a 3-day intensive training with the coordinators who are going to work in those schools. We do continuing professional development every 2 weeks over the course of the entire intervention so that the coordinators are coming together on a regular basis and they're also receiving professional development. We obviously meet with principals at 3 different points during the year, and we coach on the ground in the schools through a program manager, coach the coordinators. And we have a system that measures fidelity of implementation so that we can know in any school at any time if a coordinator is struggling. We can look at the student support information system and see that they're meeting benchmarks and that they're able to refer students to services, et cetera. So it's a pretty supported system. The cost currently, and the cost is dependent on the number of schools in a district. So if a district were to do all of its schools, the cost per school is obviously cheaper. But on average, it's about $22,000 for a school district with about 10 to 12 schools, $22,000 a school to get it launched.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the thoroughness. We have a question. I might sort of pitch this to Turnaround. So bear with me. We're trying to wordsmith the question just a little bit. How does the research on the impacts of poverty inform social emotional best practices? And then also, if you can shed any light on the use of building blocks in out-of-school time programs. So there's a social emotional piece, an overlap, and then the out-of-school time programs piece.
So it's an interesting continuum that we work within. Our school partners, more often than not, have after-school beacon or embedded youth development programs and services. So a former partner that is now part of our alumni cohort, for example, Fairmont Community School. They have a provider in the building, but all of their staff are trained as part of our model and sit in on weekly services as well as receive coaching and ongoing feedback, from turnaround staff. So to the extent that positive youth development is baked into the K-12 continuum of services in the school day, we've actually embedded building blocks and those resources there. To my knowledge, we have not explicitly partnered with a youth development organization or out-of-school time organization to deliver these trainings apart or distinct from the school service. And I think there was a second part to that question. Can you refresh exactly what that question was?
The first part was actually about the research on the impact of poverty informing social emotional best practice.
So I think the heart of building blocks really does unpack what the science is saying about the set of skills and mindsets that are required for young people to become successful learners. And so that lives at the core of building blocks. I mean, that was part of the original question that we were asking as an organization, and why we moved from a model that focused almost exclusively on the environment and the integration of mental health services to a more balanced set of practices for both adult level skill building and mindset shift, as well as student level growth mindsets and skills. I hope that answers the question. I mean, we can share through our website and a follow-up an annotated bibliography that unpacks what specific pieces, seminal literature and research we were leveraging to actually develop the building blocks for learning.
Okay, perfect. And so since we're running out of time, well, we kind of ran out of time, we're just going to ask this last question, and this is open to both organizations. Do you exist in rural communities? And then the second part of that question is, what recommendations do both Turnaround and City Connects have for student support services that exist in rural communities?
So given our origin story, where we really were developed and launched to serve New York City children, the backdrop of September 11th, we have not brought our full embedded school model to rural communities. We have done trainings in rural communities and for districts, and in increasingly developing a district and a state level model where we can raise the critical consciousness about the impact of adversity and trauma and share a suite of services and tools for districts and rural schools.
City Connects similarly has not worked in rural districts. We're working now to look at the array of services and community agencies that are possible in some rural districts to see how feasible it is to do such a community agency heavy model in rural schools. And I have an answer for the person who asked about the attrition rate. For students who stayed within the district, and those were the ones that we were able to follow from first grade through 12th grade, they were obviously in the district. There was a near zero attrition rate, obviously. And the attrition rate that we had was well within the National Clearinghouse standards.
Thank you so much to our speakers and all our participants. I especially appreciate you sticking with us over time a little bit. We really believe this is an important topic and that these are two approaches that are not only happening, but they're working, and so we appreciate everyone's engagement. These slides and a recording will be available on our website in the next few days, and for those of you joining as participants, there will be a survey that pops up for you when you exit. And we really encourage and request you to fill out that survey. It will help us to know more about you and more about how we can put more events like this together. Thanks again to our speakers, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you as well from City Connects.
All right. The recording will end now.